Hey guys, this is Ben, and in today's video we're going to talk about prayer, and specifically the question of like how should I pray correctly. And what we what I want to take a look at is the question of like selfish prayers, asking for things that you feel selfish for asking for, or that aren't really the most holy of desires. So maybe you just want a lot of money so you can have maybe a nicer car, or I don't know, whatever it is, it could be a million things. Maybe you want an expanded shoe budget, you know, and you already spend a lot of money on shoes or something like that. And so I think for most of us, or maybe not for most of us, but for a lot of us, the attitude is like, I can't pray to God and ask for that. I feel bad for wanting that. I shouldn't even want that, It's so selfish of me to like want this selfish thing. And there's this attitude, I guess we come at this with there's sort of two things that stop us from praying prayers like that. First of all, we say, if you want your prayer answered, you need to pray in God's will. In other words, like, God already knows everything. God already knows what you need. And if you prayed perfectly in God's will, then you would have all your prayers answered all the time. And then on top of that, there's this question of like, isn't it good to pray correctly? Shouldn't we learn how to pray? And so there's this sense of like, I gotta pray right, and then like I'll be doing the right thing. I'll be praying correctly. I'll be praying to God correctly, and I'll be a good person. Okay, now, first of all, those 2 points, like, first of all, there's nothing wrong with wanting to pray correctly. Why would you rather pray incorrectly? So I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And then on the other hand, to have your prayer answered, you need to pray in God's will, or that to have it answered in the way you're asking. Yeah, like, because God knows everything, and if you ask for something that really is bad, then God's not going to do that. But if you were to pray, and if it is the Lord's will, it's like so many verses say, then God will do it. Now, here's the thing. Does that mean that you shouldn't pray the selfish prayer? Not necessarily. There is an attitude of get your life right, get your attitude right, get your prayer right, and then pray it. And what I want to suggest to you today is maybe that's a bad attitude. Maybe that's not the way things are supposed to work. Maybe it works more like this. Maybe God wants you to have the things that you want. But you need to pray to God about it, open up with God about it. And perhaps if you're desiring the wrong things, instead of fixing that before you pray, maybe it's through your prayer life that your desires get cleaned up. You see, there's an attitude where we say, I've got to clean up my desires before I can come before God. And what I want to suggest to you is God is the one who's going to clean up your desires. It's your relationship with God that's going to clean up your desires. And so what happens is we fall into this state where we won't pray, but we totally are sort of worshiping things and praying about things and thinking about things like all the time. And so our life gets separated where like there's something you want in this world, and it's what you literally think about like most of the day. And yet you never pray, you never talk to God about that or ask God for that because you feel guilty that that's what you're thinking about all day and that's what you want all day. So you just never pray about it. Okay, so what happens is you're excluding God from like something that's very near and dear to your heart because you feel bad for it being very near and dear to your heart. And the thing is, you need to let God in. Let God in and let Him do some cleaning up. Let Him get in there because God's good at like cleaning up that stuff inside there. And I I've even heard preachers preach, that like one pastor, he literally said that if you've got unconfessed sin, you should just forget about praying, because there's no way your prayer is going to be answered. And what I'm saying to you is, maybe the point of prayer is not always to pray perfectly and to have your prayer answered all the time and get what you pray for all the time. Maybe that's not why we necessarily pray. Because think about it. Think about it logically from this point of view. I remember a long time ago, Bill Maher used to have a TV show called Politically Incorrect. And there was a Christian hardcore band that we used to listen to back then called POD. And my friend had recorded it off TV with VCR, and he had the tape, and I watched it. And it was interesting. Bill Maher brought up this question, and the simple question was, does prayer change things? Does prayer ever really change anything? And Bill Maher wasn't coming at you with scientific evidence of here's a bunch of people who prayed and then here's what happened. He wasn't doing that. He was just saying he didn't like the theological concept of prayer changing things. So he was looking at the theology, and it was just, if God's all knowing and all powerful, then God is not going to be swayed by what you asking, him to do something. Because God knows better than you. God already knows what the best thing to do is, but otherwise he wouldn't be God. So therefore, your praying has no effect on what happens. Because God already knows what he's going to do. He doesn't need your input. Now, I disagree with Bill Maher, and it was one of those things where I wish I was there and could have said this, and perhaps God has things he wants to do, but wants you to ask for it first. Which is not an unfamiliar concept. I mean, a lot of parents are that way. They're where you wanted the kid to do X, but you wanted them to ask you for it first. In other words, maybe the more important thing from God's perspective is not giving you a certain thing, but rather you coming into alignment with the attitude. And so maybe prayer is not really, doesn't have anything to do with changing God, but it's more about changing you. You see? And so that's kind of what I'm talking about here with this other thing. If you have some selfish thing, I don't know, that you feel guilty, materialistic, worldly thing that you want, but you think about it all the time, maybe it's success, fame, wealth, whatever, luxury, but it's what you think about all the time, and then you don't pray about it because you feel guilty. Well, the problem is you're going to wind up never praying, because the Bible's quite clear. We can't fix the messiness inside our hearts. We have to let God in there to do the cleaning up and doing the fixing. And so there's a passage here that kind of makes the point as clear as possible. It's in Matthew chapter 7, and I think in Luke 6, a similar thing. I'm not going to look it up. But anyway, Matthew 7 says, "Ask and it will be given to you. Search and you will find. Knock and the door will be open. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who searches finds. To the one who knocks, the door will be opened." Okay, so, here Jesus is telling us, yes, totally ask for things, and God will do them, which would make sense, according to what I said. That sometimes God wants you to ask before he's going to do it for you. But he goes on to say, "What man among you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him? Therefore, whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them. This is the law and the prophets." So, and there's the golden rule right there. But anyway, and he even compares prayer to the parent-child relationship, a father and a son. Okay, but the point here is that I want to make is Jesus compares us in the prayer life to the child. And he's saying you need to ask God for stuff. That's the point of Jesus, what Jesus is saying here. And he's saying, do you think God's going to get angry at you and give you something mean because you asked for something? In other words, like, children all the time ask for things that they don't need. And, so we assume that the kid, he says, if your son asks for bread, will you give him a rock? And if he asks for a fish, will you give him a snake? Well, I mean, the bottom line is, do children necessarily need everything they ask for? Do they always need bread or a fish? No. So in other words, God's not going to get mad at you for just coming to him with just something that you want. You might not be wanting the right thing. So a simple way to do it is to say, God, I really want this. But if I'm desiring the wrong thing, show me. And help me deal with that. But you need to open up to who you are inside with God. And, technically, you can translate this, instead of asking it will be given to you, keep asking, keep searching, keep knocking. And so I've heard a pastor who, he disagrees with what I'm saying in this video, and he defends the position that, like, your prayer should be perfect before you even bother praying. He literally said, forget about praying if you've got unconfessed sin and stuff like that. And, like, this verse flies in the face of what he says, because this verse is like, you don't have to have the perfect prayer. Don't worry about God getting angry about your prayer not being perfect. God, and come to God like a little child in your prayers, and just talk to him about what's on your heart, and God will help you. And technically, you can translate it: keep asking, keep searching, keep knocking. And so he takes that, and he this is a very liberal interpretation. He reads into, well, it doesn't say ask, it says keep asking, that you have to develop this, like, disciplined life of, keep asking means that, like, your prayers have to be perfect, because it says keep asking. So there's this life of disciplined prayer. It's like, that's not necessarily what that means. Like, that's liberal to read into that like that. Like, it just means keep asking. So, like, I could read into that and find something totally different, and it would be just as legitimate as your thing. So, like, I could say it means, like, more like nag God, or, like, always ask. Always ask, always ask, always ask. It doesn't mean, like, you'll find what you're looking for, necessarily, but you will find, and doors will be opened. In other words, it's through prayer that things get fixed inside. And maybe what you really want, what you think, you really have some internal desire for something, and you think this is going to fill it, so you ask God for this, and God shows you through your prayer life, you ask him for that, and he does something else in your life in answer to your prayer that really fulfills the need that you thought you had. And that's very common. And, and I just want to finish with one final point. I know this one lady, and she tells me, she's a little bit strange. She tells me that she hates her neighbor because he's crazy. She hates him. She really hates him. And she says she prays to God every day. And she says she tells God, I hate him. I hate my neighbor. And she prays to God for help with hating her neighbor. But she's real straight with God. I hate him. And she always finishes with a very simple point, and she always tells me, she said, Ben? She says, there's no point in lying to the big man. And that's what this stuff boils down to. This attitude of get your prayer life perfect before you pray. It's just it's putting on a face. It's putting on a fake image. Putting on a false pretense for God. The last one you're going to trick. You can't come to God and say, God, I want world peace. If you don't want world peace, because he knows you don't want world peace. If you actually want world peace, then, okay. But, like, you can't be fake with God and honestly think you're getting away with it. That makes no sense. It's God. He definitely knows that you're being fake. He already knows what you want before you asked for it. Sometimes it's more important that you invite him in to your desires. In other words, the Christian walk is about God moving into your heart. And he might take a look around and say, you know what, some of these desires you have and some of these attitudes and character issues We got a little clean up to do. But he's going to help you with the cleaning up. He's not going to want you to clean up before you can come before him. The whole point of Christianity is Jesus saves us from sin. You know, and we could do more videos on this, but like, it's not like you get your life right and then you go to heaven because you got your life right. And it's so sad, you know, the way that this is yet another way that salvation by works is smuggled back into our churches, and by good, God-fearing, honestly, you know, trying to do the best thing Christians. But this kind of preaching, the reason I don't like it is because it sets people up for all sorts of downfalls. Because if you stray from Christianity, then in the grace of the gospel, then you become like a lambs to the slaughter of like things way out there. Because if you start moving over into salvation by works, that opens you up to things like the teachings of ISIS, you know, and stuff like that, because or Mormons maybe, because it's an easy jump at that point. You know, and the other way salvation by works sneaks in is like this consequences of sin talk is another sneaky one, where like they're not going to say that you're going to go to hell for sinning, but a tree might fall on your car, or like you'll have, you know, economic problems or something, or your family will be dysfunctional or something. And if you start thinking that way, you start thinking in that karma way, and like, you know, you think that like grace and salvation by, you know, Jesus and forgiveness on the cross and all that, that was how I got into this Christianity bit. But now that I'm in it, it's just good little boys and girls have good things happen to them, and bad little boys and girls have bad things happen to them. And it becomes completely like, you know, you start out with grace and you finish it by works and by working hard. And that's not Christianity. God actually helps you live the Christian life. It's not as though you have nothing to do. And, you know, so I'm not someone who thinks that like you just become God's little robot. But God helps you. And if he didn't help you, it would be hopeless for you. And he doesn't just help you with, you know, I don't know, teaching you how to live. He actually helps you want to live better. But you have to, you know, do the stuff. And one of the stuffs you do is you pray. And the problem is we're not going to pray if we don't open up to God about the things that we really want real bad, even if they're guilty pleasures. That is a way that the devil is trying to get you to close a part of your life down and like keep you from praying much. So in other words, how many of us want stuff real bad all day, every day? Why don't you pray about it and invite God into those longings and desires? Why are we not praying about it? Because we've been tricked with this deception that like we need to pray perfect prayers. And so then God's not then this whole grace, you know, life that Paul talks about, he says walking with the Spirit. And he means with in a sense of like the Spirit is like you're walking side by side through life. You keep in step, like marching with the Spirit. So like there's stuff for you to do. You have to do your part, but God also does his part. And it always works that way. You know, Peter says in 2 Peter 1 that God's given you everything you need to live a Christ-like, godly life. Therefore, you do everything you can to be virtuous, to be self-controlled, to be perseverant, to be, you know, to be godlike, to have brotherly kindness, love, you know, these types of things. So you need to do all you can, everything you can, but don't think that that's going to make you right. God still has to like work through that. And if you do it with that attitude, you'll see that God's working through you, opening up to him, letting him in. He'll change the stuff on the inside and you'll become a better person. But it's, you know, if it wasn't for God working in me through that stuff, then like I would be way off. You know, I'd be laying on a gutter high on crack. You know, bottom line. So it's just so sad that prayer is such a, you know, especially about all of our guilty pleasures. That should actually be a great way for us to connect with God, by opening up to God about all those guilty pleasures. And it's a part of our life that we probably desperately need to invite God into, for Him to do some cleanup work. And people have this attitude of like, I need to get clean before I come before God. And it's like, nope. God's here to help you with that stuff. You can't fix it. You need help with your evil desires. You need God's help. And not stop doing them and then God will help you. No, God, come to God with the nastiness that you are, because there is no hope for you otherwise. Okay, that's the gospel. That God saves you from sin, not just from some punishments in hell, but from who you are inside. Okay, and there's an apologetic to that too. You know, that like, wow, you know, if you're an atheist out there and you don't believe in God, one of the simplest things you can do is start to really pray. Maybe keep notes on your prayers, but just earnestly do it. Not with like belief that something's going to happen, but just as a test, just as a science experiment, just to see how it goes. You'd probably be amazed. You know, so I can see where someone thinks, you know, why worry about all apologetics if we just, you know, open up to the gospel in our hearts. And the problem is I think that is a gigantic problem in the church today. We have a gospel that's like, you know, go to VBS, get yourself a free ticket to heaven as a kid, and then, you know, work hard to be a good person. And that's, the church is about teaching you the rules of right and wrong. And there's that. And for the rest of the times for football and I don't know, eating your snacks. You know, like, that's so not what Christianity is about. Like, God is the God of everything. He needs to enter into every aspect of your life, even the nasty aspects, because He's the best at cleaning those up. So anyway, I hope this video makes some sense. I know there's some people out there who totally disagree with me, that, you know, thump their Bibles every day, but maybe I'll make a more hard-nosed argument. But I just wanted to put this video out there. Pray your selfish prayers and expect God to respond to them, and to oftentimes show you why you're desiring the wrong thing. Thank you for your time.